I must be cruel, only to be kind. Sweets to the sweet. The lady doth protest too much. Good night, sweet prince. To thine own self be true. Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. And of course, to be or not to be, that is the question. All of these famous quotes come from one place, Hamlet by William Shakespeare. Written around 1600, the play remains highly influential to this day, with the role of Hamlet being a coveted one for both actors and actresses. The play initiates a change not only in Shakespeare's own writing, but also in European writing in general. According to the eminent literary critic Frank Kermode, quote, "No play before Hamlet could have accommodated so much and so diverse metaphysical and psychological speculation." And Hamlet, quote, "is the first great tragedy Europe had produced for 2,000 years, close quote. Clearly, Kermode is drawing a comparison between Hamlet and works like Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, an ancient Greek tragedy. So why is Hamlet so groundbreaking? Let's look at the history of theater and then at some specifics of this play itself to attempt to answer this question. During the Middle Ages, the Greek and Roman canon of plays had largely been lost, not to resurface until the Renaissance. So, although the medieval man was familiar with Ovid's Metamorphoses and ancient Roman history, they did not know about Sophocles' Oedipus Rex or Euripides' Medea, to name a few. This lack of theatrical history did not stop people in the Middle Ages from putting on plays, however. Guilds, organizations of various trades like weavers, often put on mystery plays, which means a play based on a Bible story or the life of the saint, in open air. What we see depicted in this slide is a mystery play, probably put on by the Carpenters Guild, as seen by the banner covering up the bottom part of the wagon. Wagons like this would have served as stages, albeit rather cramped ones, and people would gather in town squares to see the play. In an age where people were largely illiterate, mystery plays, like stained glass windows in churches, had an instructional purpose to teach about Christianity. The drama of medieval Europe was explicitly moral and religious. During the early Tudor period, approximately 1500 to 1570, plays moved indoors for private performances in the banqueting halls of the nobility. On this slide, you see the Great Hall at Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire, where Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream was first performed. Later in this early Tudor period, plays began to be staged in the courtyards of inns. But the first purpose-built theater, named imaginatively the Theatre, appeared in 1570 and was located in Shoreditch. Theaters were generally located outside of London's city limits so that they did not have to comply with regulations. Theaters were just one form of relatively cheap entertainment at this time, and so plays competed with attractions like bear baiting and brothels, also located in the suburbs of London. The Southwark Liberty, located south of the Thames, was the home of two early theaters, the Rose and Shakespeare's famous Globe Theatre. Today that area is part of London proper, but in the 16th century it would have been the suburbs. You can see on the map here where various early theaters were located. See how developed the area north of the Thames River is compared to the South Bank. The theater is located all the way up at the top right of the screen in Shoreditch, also a suburb at this time, along with another early theater, the Curtain. There was also indoor theaters like Blackfriars, marked with a heart there just southwest of St. Paul's Cathedral. Live theater in 16th and 17th century London was the equivalent of the movies in pre-COVID America. Everybody went. All classes, both men and women. The cheapest tickets cost 1 penny. This is the modern-day equivalent of the cost of a glass of beer. So, affordable for almost everyone. Your 1 penny would buy you a spot right in the front of the stage, and you would be a groundling. Unlike modern-day concerts where the close spots are super expensive, the standing room only space at the foot of the stage constituted the cheap seats. This slide depicts a modern production of a Shakespearean play at the reconstructed Globe Theatre, which was built to resemble the original Globe Theatre as much as possible. You see all those people crowded in at the foot of the stage? Those are the groundlings. Up to 25,000 people went to the theater in London each week. To put this in perspective, the population of London in 1600 was around 200,000, so that's 12.5% of the population attending the play every week. Thus, there was a constant demand for material, i.e. new plays. Like today, playhouses were shut down during outbreaks of the plague. However, people came back to the theater when the danger of plague subsided. I sure hope that holds true in our day and age. I really miss live theater. And going to the movies, too. Performances would begin at 2 p.m. to take advantage of the natural light, and the audience was very much a part of the performance. After all, they were right there. Many purpose-built theaters of the 16th and 17th centuries were open-air roundish buildings with a thrust stage that jutted out into the audience. Unlike productions today, which have elaborate sets, props and set pieces were not emphasized. Most of the theater company's money would have been tied up in costumes instead, as they often bought cast-off fancy clothing from nobility. Theater directors of the early modern era were not concerned with authenticity, so they would have staged Julius Caesar in Elizabethan dress instead of in Roman togas. After a time, indoor private theaters began to spring up, like Blackfriars, which I pointed out on the map of London earlier, that catered to a more exclusive audience. Because these theaters were indoors, they could deploy greater technical innovations, like more trapdoors, special effects, etc. Audience members wishing to be seen would pay extra to sit on the stage and be a part of the play's action. Sometimes they would even interfere in the acting. This slide depicts an open-air theater like Shakespeare's Globe. You can see the space for the groundlings as well as the boxes for the clients who wanted to pay a little more for a more comfortable seat. I'd like to talk very briefly about the differences between Greek drama and early modern English drama. Although we didn't have time to read Oedipus Rex or Medea as a class, some students read those works for their papers and adaptation projects. In Greek drama, the violence never happens on stage, it is only described. But in early modern drama, they have no such qualms about showing violence. You'll see that Hamlet racks up quite a body count by the play's end. Another difference is that Greek plays take place all in one day in terms of the action in the play. The scene never changes, and there is just one main plot. Aristotle called this unity of time, place, and action, and advocated for it fiercely. Many early modern dramatists paid no attention to Aristotle's advice, including Shakespeare. You will see big leaps in time in some plays, shifting scenes of action, and even one or more subplots to complicate the action. In Hamlet, we have the main drama plot of Hamlet trying to figure out if, when, and how to take revenge, but we also have the tension between him and Ophelia, the threat of invasion from Norway, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, etc. Needless to say, a Greek tragedy would not have any such side diversions. During Shakespeare's time, there were several different kinds of popular plays, including history plays, revenge tragedies, and comedies. The definition of a comedy in this period was a play in which the social order was first disrupted and then reordered by a marriage at the end. Shakespeare certainly writes his share of histories, tragedies, and comedies, but his later plays, like The Tempest, pictured here, and Cymbeline, are often classified as romances because they don't fit neatly into any of the prior categories. In the 16th and 17th century, plays were published by performance, if you will. Some eventually would go on to be published as quartos. A quarto refers to the number of times a full-size page or folio has been folded. Basically, just know that a quarto is a small book, maybe the size of a smallish paperback book of today, that was not as expensive as other books. Bootleg copies of plays did get published, from actors' prompt books or from audience members using their memories, including an early version of Hamlet that I'll speak about in a few moments. The printed plays contained very minimal stage directions, mainly just entrances and exits, like the famous exeunt pursued by a bear from Shakespeare's A Winter's Tale. By the way, if you see the word exeunt, spelled E-X-E-U-N-T, it is the plural of exit, meaning that more than one person is leaving the stage. This is very different from plays of today, which contain very detailed stage directions and staging recommendations. For this reason, the director has a lot of license when staging a Shakespeare play. Though a few of Shakespeare's plays were published as quartos, 18 of them were published in the famous First Folio, a large book printed first in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death, and compiled by his associates. Some of Shakespeare's plays may have been lost forever because no quartos exist and they weren't included in the First Folio. By the way, the downtown Dallas Library has a First Folio from 1623 in its collection. I have seen it. I want to begin the next section of this lecture on Shakespeare and authorship by putting to bed one of the great literary conspiracy theories of our time. Shakespeare did write his own plays, not Sir Francis Bacon or the Earl of Oxford Edmund de Vere, or even Queen Elizabeth herself. These theories began circulating around 1785, when a clergyman and scholar named James Wilmot set out to write a biography of Shakespeare. He visited Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's hometown, and tried looking for some books Shakespeare may have owned, or some legal correspondence, or some letters Shakespeare may have written. When he didn't find anything, he concluded that Shakespeare's wonderfully complex and literary plays could not have been written by a man who left no record of scholarly life. Wilmot speculated that the real writer was Shakespeare's contemporary, Sir Francis Bacon, who is credited for developing the scientific method, and who served as Attorney General under Elizabeth and Lord High Chancellor under James I and VI. This conspiracy gained traction in the late 19th century and into the 20th. It has had some surprising celebrity proponents, including such varied personages as Mark Twain, Helen Keller, Sigmund Freud, and Malcolm X. The three things I want to make clear here are these. 1. No serious Shakespeare scholar believes in these conspiracy theories. 2. These theories are mainly fueled by classism. In other words, how the theories cannot accept that the son of a glove maker from the backwaters of England, who only attended school through the modern equivalent of 8th grade, could create such resounding and enduring works of literature. Students, this is snobbery of the highest order. Finally, you should not take your literary scholarship information from celebrities, no matter how talented they are in their own wheelhouses. Just like I won't be giving you medical advice or telling you how to shoot basketball hoops. So, Shakespeare definitely wrote Shakespeare, but that doesn't mean that he wrote alone. He may have had collaborators or people who served as co-writers. Think about modern-day TV shows. There is usually a team of writers. Since acting companies staged multiple performances per week, they were constantly on the lookout for new material, which they would intersperse with their older works. Shakespeare himself probably collaborated on or edited plays usually credited to other playwrights, like Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy. Another thing to note is that originality, as we think of it today, was not especially valued in the early modern era. Playgoers in 16th and 17th century England were more impressed with how the play was interpreting a work rather than originality. So Shakespeare and his fellow playwrights mined popular literary works and history books for inspiration. These popular literary works, like The Palace of Pleasure and Holinshed's Chronicles, may also have been drawing their material from sources like Boccaccio's Decameron, or from the work of earlier historians. This is not so very different than today's popular entertainment. I don't have stats on TV shows, but according to Stephen Follows' 2015 study of films, only 39% of Hollywood films were truly original. Not only does adapting already existing works make sense in terms of the speed at which you can come up with new ideas, but it also makes financial sense. Adapted works drive interest at the box office. Follows found that only 15% of the top 10 grossing movies of each year were original. Random side note. What is the genre with the most original screenplays? Rom-coms, which are 70% original. So it seems like we are not that different from the Elizabethan audience that Shakespeare and his fellow playwrights were trying to entice into their playhouses by adapting popular works. Shakespeare's Hamlet was entered into the Stationer's Register, a kind of early form of copywriting, in 1602, but it wasn't published right away. A bad quarto of Hamlet, probably a piracy, published by an actor who had played in the production, emerged in 1603. This bad quarto had some noticeable differences with Hamlet as we know it today, including different names for some of the characters and some differences in the to-be or not-to-be speech. An authorized version of the play appeared in quarto form in 1604 through 1605. This version is a bit longer than the one contained in the 1623 First Folio. If you watch the Kenneth Branagh version of Hamlet, which I do recommend, he includes this version. By category, Hamlet is a revenge tragedy or a tragic play based around the idea of revenge. In these plays, the main character is greatly wronged, but in seeking revenge, becomes himself a victim. This genre got its birth in ancient Rome, with the plays of Seneca. But Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy, first staged in 1587, really got the genre going in early modern England. Kyd's play shares more than just a revenge plot with Hamlet, as it also features a ghost and a play within a play used as a plot device to catch out the guilty. Shakespeare was also probably responsible for some major revisions to Kyd's Spanish Tragedy in 1601. The staging of Marston's Antonio's Revenge in 1599 continued to fan the popularity of this genre, and Shakespeare, ever sensitive to trends, certainly tried his hand at the genre. He probably wrote Hamlet in 1600, immediately after writing Julius Caesar in 1599. Shakespeare didn't make up Hamlet out of thin air. It was already an old story in 1600. The story began with the Norse legend of Amlothy, which appeared in print around 1200 in a book called Historia Danica by Saxo Grammaticus. This book came out in a printed version in 1514, and it contains the story of Hamlet in its third book. In Grammaticus's version, Hamlet's father kills the king of Norway in single combat, but Hamlet's enemies send a woman to seduce and then kill him. He turns the tables, however, and rapes and kills her first, escapes to England where he marries a princess, then returns to Denmark where he enacts spectacular revenge on his enemies, boiling one and feeding him to pigs, in addition to burning down the entire palace. Obviously, this Hamlet is a lot more decisive than Shakespeare's version, but the two do share a gloomy, melancholic disposition. A French version of Hamlet's story by Belforest appears in 1576 in a book of collected stories called Histoire Tragique. This version sets the tale in a contemporary Renaissance court and has Hamlet faking madness as a means of self-defense. This French version is probably the source for an earlier English Hamlet play that scholars call Hamlet. Is a German word for original. Hamlet was written around 1587. It adds the ghost, the dumb show, the fencing match at the end of the play, and the Laertes-Hamlet dichotomy. When Shakespeare creates his masterpiece, he makes the play within the play a means of revenge, sets Laertes as Hamlet's foil, and makes the lack of revenge purely Hamlet's fault and not the fault of circumstances beyond Hamlet's control. Shakespeare may have drawn Hamlet's characterization from Timothy Bright's treatise on melancholy. According to Shakespeare scholar Frank Kermode, Shakespeare deliberately lengthens the play's action, and that one so much so that one almost has to assume an audience that knew the story and was willing to be teased by indirection. I've split the reading up between the 2 weeks. This week we'll tackle Acts 1 and 2, and I'd like to put you on notice for a few things to look for. Most of the lines in this play are delivered in iambic pentameter, the most common poetic form in English. You can see the famous to be or not to be speech from Act 3, Scene 1 here, and you can see how it is a poem. Iambic pentameter refers to a type of syllable pattern, 5 sets of 2-syllable units, or feet, per line of poetry, where the emphasis is on the second syllable. The poetry is unrhymed, however, in Hamlet. An unrhymed iambic pentameter has a special name, blank verse. This is also the form used for Milton's famous work Paradise Lost. Sometimes characters who began speaking in blank verse switch over to prose. Hamlet does this when talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in Act 2, and keeps up the prose even when speaking to the players, who respond in blank verse. One could make a nice argument about why Hamlet is switching how he speaks and what he might mean. I'd like to highlight a few of the themes in this early part of the play. First of all, Hamlet has a corruption motif, a motif that begins early on in the play and continues through to the end. This could be physical corruption, like things corroding or disintegrating, or moral corruption, the dissolution of standards or behavior. What examples of corruption do we see in these first 2 acts? Another theme to be on the watch for, of course, is madness. Hamlet resolves to pretend insanity in order to investigate the ghost's accusations against his father more thoroughly. But other characters interact with insanity, either by reacting to it or succumbing to it. What are characters' attitudes towards Hamlet's faked madness in these first few acts? A final thing to be on the watch for is meta-theatricality, with meta literally meaning a level beyond. So a metaphysical work looks at aspects that exist beyond the physical realm, and a meta-theatrical work comments on itself. Richard Hornby notes that there are 5 ways one can find meta-theater on stage. Ceremonies within a play, role-playing within a role, a reference to reality, which we now call breaking the fourth wall, self-reference of the drama to drama, and a play within a play. Shakespeare has several other plays containing meta-theatrical elements. For example, plays where characters consciously take on another role, like Twelfth Night, and other plays that contain plays, like Midsummer Night's Dream. How do Hamlet the play and Hamlet the character exhibit meta-theatricality? I sincerely hope you watch this play, either with the BBC production or the Kenneth Branagh version. The actor Derek Jacobi, who plays Claudius in Branagh's Hamlet, plays Hamlet in the earlier BBC version. The play was meant to be seen in performance and not merely read, but you'll need to read along as you watch so that you can note things in your text. Keep in mind that all plays are interpretations. How characters enter and exit, the stage business, that means gestures and staging, the props, the tone of voice, the sets, the costuming, all of this is interpretation. You may appreciate the interpretation or you may revolt against it. That's okay. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride, pondering to yourself, why did the director make those choices? How does this performance give me insight into Hamlet? Happy Shakespearing. That's all for now.